are making their way into the room. I also want to be thoughtful of people's schedules. So as you join, invite you to mute yourself if you don't mind. And we'll go ahead and begin. Again, good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Ian Escabel, and I have the good fortune to be co-facilitating today's conversation with Carly Romero. I know there are numbers of folks who are with us today, so thank you to each one of you. We are also fortunate to be joined today with Sandra and Denise, who are our translators. And so I invite Denise to share a little bit more about interpretation directives. Denise?
Thank you. We have interpretation from English to Spanish today. For interpretation, after the instructions are given, you will find a bottom of the screen at the right-hand corner. You can select para interpretación al español. Después de esas instrucciones, oprimir el icono que aparecerá globo terráqueo en la esquina derecha al fondo de la pantalla. Otra la interpretación y español. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. I think I was hearing kind of every other word. Hope folks had a chance to hear and understand those directions. And also, thank you, Teo, for running slides and showing us how to access the interpretation that way as well. Speaking of Teo, curious if you want to say anything else about caption instructions, or if you feel like we're good with that.
Yes, I can share just a little bit. So also at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see a live transcript button, and you have the option to show subtitles or view the full transcript if you need closed captioning for our session today. Thanks.
Thank you, Teo. Thank you, Denise. Thank you, Ian. Good morning, everyone. My name is Carly Romero. I'm gonna just give a little bit of background to NewMexicoWomen.Org and the Healthy Masculinities community of practice. We'll get started shortly. So NewMexicoWomen.Org is the only fund of its kind in New Mexico that works to advance opportunities for women, girls, and gender expansive folks statewide so that they can lead self-sufficient, healthy, and empowered lives. We do this through 3 key program areas: grant making, research, and training and education, with a strategy centered around gender justice and healing. And in 2017, NewMexicoWomen.Org published a community-based research project based on dialogue from all across the state, where we really heard a deep need and desire for more opportunities to engage men, particularly cis men, in gender justice efforts. We simply can't solve patriarchy and violence without men. So this led us to form the New Mexico Healthy Masculinities Collaborative in 2018 with Tewa Women United, Together for Brothers, New Mexico Health Equity Partnership, and the Transgender Resource Center of New Mexico. And shortly thereafter, Ian joined us as a facilitator to help steward the shared body of work. And Ian, maybe you can share a bit about your experience, the toolkit, and why we're here today.
Thank you, Carly. Yes, I've felt very fortunate to be part of this work as a father, as a cisgendered man, as a partner. I know I have a lot of work to do myself. And so being in community with leaders, being in community with different folks from across our state, from different cultures, from multiple genders, has felt really healing and important to me as I continue to do my work. And we talk about it in our collaborative that we have external programs, but we are also the work. And so that space to encourage each other to question and go deeper and try on practices has felt grateful that each one of you has joined us to be in the practice with us as well. I think in terms of co-facilitating, I'm really pleased to be sharing this space with Carly. We often talk about how we're both parents learning, we're finding our way, we're curious to grow. especially about today's topic. I think, unfortunately, as a man, I've seen how violence can show up in parenting in unhealthy ways, and I'm interested in trying on practices and learning more how to not perpetuate that type of behavior. We'll be spotlighting speakers on Zoom today and muting and turning off cameras for others, just so you have some ideas about some of the logistics. So you see that format right now with me and Carly. But we do invite you to share in the comments and to be asking any questions you might have during our time. We have a section of our time today where we'll look to participant questions, and we want it to be interactive. We're going to monitor the responses. And so thank you for our team members who are taking a look at that. And then as we begin our time together, I also ask that all of participants and panelists enter this space with an open heart and an open mind, that you embody love, courage, connection, and presence. Those were core values that the collaborative discussed and that have guided our work as we put together a toolkit, as we're refining our toolkit, and as we enter this space. I'm going to next share the bios of our two panelists. So thank you again to Jess Clark and to Dutta Flying Earth. And bear with me as I try to read these bios a little bit slower than I read the bios last time. And so Jess Clark is the Director of Sexual Violence Prevention for the New Mexico Coalition of Sexual Assault Programs. Jess is passionate about fostering community and connection while working towards social change. 12 years in the anti-violence movement has only reinforced for him that sustainable change happens by honoring the inextricable links between the personal and the societal. Jess Clark worked for over a decade building and implementing the education and prevention program at Solace Sexual Assault Services. In his work, he leveraged his ability to create rapport quickly to connect with everyone from elementary school students to church congregations about subjects many people find difficult to discuss. Jess has steadfastly established the importance of providing transgender education as a critical part of sexual violence prevention strategies, and has demonstrated how to do it in a way that builds community and support rather than becoming the divisive subject that so many fear. Jess's passion for prevention naturally led to his role as the Director of Sexual Violence Prevention for the New Mexico Coalition of Sexual Assault Programs, where he supports agencies across New Mexico in building prevention programs that are rooted in addressing systems of oppression, adopting best practices to reflect the needs of individual communities, and moving our message through shared values. He also contributed to the field internationally as host of Both and, a sexual violence prevention podcast. So thanks, Jess, for bringing your podcast experience to this space. Jess's true love has always been in systems change and continues to support organizations and businesses through his consulting business with education and technical assistance. Jess has had the pleasure of serving on the board of directors for Girls Inc. of Santa Fe and Transgender Resource Center of New Mexico, and currently serves on the board of trustees for Southwestern College. Jess is a parent of an awesome 6 and nearly 3/4 old kid, Micah. So Jess, so happy for you to be with us. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Ampawa Dutta Flying Earth. I've had the privilege to know Dutta for probably over a decade and have appreciated how he's been a guiding presence around healthy masculinities for me personally. So thank you for that, Dutta. Dutta's bio reads, in his capacity as executive director at NACA and NISN, Dutta has been instrumental in representing NACA as a premier example of Indigenous education nationwide that combines academic preparation for higher learning, grounding in culture and identity, and holistic wellness together for community transformation through young people. He has been named as a Pahara Next Gen Fellow, a Pahara Aspen Fellow, an Albuquerque 40 Under 40 recipient, and a W.K. Kellogg Foundation Community Leadership Network Fellow. Dutta grew up on Standing Rock Reservation in South and North Dakota. Dutta is the youngest of 3 siblings and a 3rd-generation college graduate. He graduated from Cornell University with a BA in government and earned a master's in business administration at the as a Woodrow Wilson Fellow at the University of New Mexico. Ampawa Dutta Flying Earth, Lakota, Dakota, Ojibwe, Akina Odaham, is the former executive director of the Native American Community Academy, a charter school in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and the current executive director of NISN, a network that assists communities in implementing structures of Indigenous education. Duta assisted in the creation of the charter school, NACA, in 2006, and the NISN network in 2014. So welcome to both of you. Thanks as I stumbled over some of that, but really appreciate each one of you being here today.
Thank you so much, Ian. We're going to jump into questions in just a minute, but I just want to start us off with a little bit of context about this conversation, which is huge. Anti-violence and affirmative consent are on their own, like really, really enormous topics to discuss. And then within the realm of parenting, there's just a tremendous amount to cover. So just like a little caveat that we'll speak to whatever shows up in the space today, and it'll be the tip of the iceberg, and we'll send some follow-up resources for folks to deepen and expand their awareness. Like there are entire books written on affirmative consent alone. Major studies and policy recommendations worldwide exist around children's human rights. There are multiple nations who have banned corporal punishment in the household, while there are still states in the US where it's legal to employ corporal punishment in schools. So that's things like spanking, hitting, that's physical punishment. And not to mention just the small components of patriarchy, white supremacy, and colonization, which are frameworks in which institutional violence thrives. So I'm not like naming all of this to overwhelm us, but to just nod to the fact that this topic is extensive. It's institutionally and culturally embedded, and we won't get to all of it today. But let's talk about some of what we can hope to sort of dismantle and combat on the micro household level, what's accessible to us as parents or caregivers or folks who have children in our lives that we lead with anti-violent and affirmative consent approaches. So child abuse includes physical, sexual, and/or emotional abuse, things like verbal shaming, as well as neglect, and can also include economic violence. Unfortunately, about 1 in 7 children in the United States experience physical abuse and/or neglect annually, with research suggesting that child abuse often co-occurs with exposure to adult domestic violence. So children who experience abuse in the household are more likely to experience, for example, like intimate partner violence in the household as well. And unfortunately, New Mexico's child abuse rate is among the worst nationally, with high rates of repeat abuse. So I don't think we need a ton of more harrowing data to understand that there's a lot of work for us to do, but recognizing the long-term impacts connected to violence in the household can motivate us in our commitment to nonviolence. Children who experience repeated use of corporal or physical punishment tend to develop more aggressive behaviors, increased aggression in school, and have an increased risk of mental health disorders and cognitive problems. And children who are spanked also show higher levels of hormones tied to toxic stress. Additionally, harsh verbal discipline can lead to more behavior problems and symptoms of depression in teens. So why and how does this relate to masculinity and this webinar series on healthy masculinities? Off top, we know that more traditional forms of mainstream masculinity often praise traits, including the exercise of violence, fighting, and the performance of aggression. And when we practice anti-violence in parenting, we are moving away from these norms and modeling another way of being. I want to offer a super brief articulation of healthy masculinities identified by the Healthy Masculinities Collaborative. We came up with some language to articulate this in 2022 in our toolkit, which folks you can find the more expanded definition in the toolkit itself. But healthy masculinities begins with recognizing, acknowledging, and putting in check one's power, privilege, and position of dominance in any given situation, whether in a family relationship, workplace, government, or even in a conversation. Healthy masculinities center on connection, compassion, emotional awareness, humility, respect, and collaboration while creating space for courageous vulnerability. And they are explicitly nonviolent. So the definition in our toolkit, like I said, is much more extensive, but for me, one of the most striking pieces as a parent is the invitation to, quote unquote, put in check one's power, privilege, and position of dominance in any social situation, because children really are the most vulnerable people in our societies. And it's so easy to lean into domineering and dominating ways of parenting when we're trying to control a situation. And sometimes our need for control as parents is completely legitimate. Like it's around safety, it's around meeting essential needs or functioning as a family, right? Like parenting is super hard. So we're here to explore some strategies and skills that can help us do it in a positive way, including affirmative consent, which has been uplifted as an important practice or part of a strategy toward mitigating violence in our households and our communities and in our culture. Together for Brothers offered a great definition of affirmative consent in a module that they offered in our toolkit that I'm going to read. And then I also want to acknowledge that we had wonderful partners from Together for Brothers had planned to join us today, and last minute they weren't able to. So just a nod to this wonderful organization that's also a great resource in our community. So they define affirmative consent as giving permission to do something, an agreement for something to happen. Affirmative consent must be informed, voluntary, and active. This means that through the demonstration of clear words and actions, a person has indicated permission to engage in mutually agreed upon activity. And while we often hear about affirmative consent related to sexual activities, it can also be applied to so many other areas of our lives. And just before we move into conversation, I want to acknowledge that, like, as a parent, I'm a parent of a 3-year-old and a 1.5-year-old. So hearing even the language of like engaging in mutually agreed upon activity, it's challenging, right? Like I'm a person who in the last maybe week and a half has navigated a tantrum for peeling a banana wrong, or not inviting my ever more independent toddler to help me open the fridge, like because she just wants to help with everything right now, or move through some deep resistance to clipping like the seatbelt in a rush circumstance. Like there are times when this idea of like mutual agreement just feels absolutely inaccessible. But I want us to keep an open mind as we move through this conversation to what is accessible for us. So to our panelists, to start off our conversation, I'm wondering, what are some tangible ways that you incorporate affirmative consent into your parenting and or your work with young people?
Uta, you look like you're thinking, so I'll go. Hey everybody, I'm really excited to be here with you, first off. Also, Ian, you never realize how long your bio is until you hear someone else read it and go, oh no, it just keeps going. I, as heard in my very long bio, I have a 6 and almost 3/4-year-old Micah, who is delightful and weird and a little creepy, just like any 6-year-old should be, because they're all a little creepy. And because I've been working in the sexual violence world for so long, I came into parenting with so many thoughts about how I was going to do it that I had taught to other people before I was a parent. And I can think back on those classes and go, oh my gosh, I had no idea what I was talking about in so many ways, because the practical application of consent in parenting and really modeling a world where children are given agency is so much more nuanced and specific than I had ever imagined. And what that's looked like for me is from when my child was really young, we talked to her about everything that we were doing. We narrated everything. I'm going to change your diaper right now. I'm going to change your clothes. I'm going to give you this medicine to help you. As she got older and could engage in that in different ways, that, just like you, Carly, has become a negotiation and kind of constant brain exercise in how can I curate choices such that my child feels like she has a say in the world. And that is, I need you to take this medicine because it's my job as your parent is to keep you healthy. Do you want to take it in a syringe? Do you want it in a little cup or a spoon or a cup? Do you want it sitting up or lying down? Which for medicine, maybe not the best thing, but anything to create agency. As she's gotten for clothes, it's do you want this or this? These are both weather appropriate choices that I have curated, and now you get to choose. I need you to hold my hand while we cross the street because my job as your parent is to keep you safe. Do you want to hold this hand or this hand? Do you want to just hold my finger? Or would you prefer I carry you? All of those things take a lot of brain space and a lot of forethought, and in the moment, recreating a scenario such that she gets to choose. And they're so worth it. They actually, at least in my experience, not only are they helping my child believe that she gets a say over her body and her life, but also it reduces the meltdowns a fair bit, because so many meltdowns in young folks is there's the banana is I didn't get a say in it. I didn't get to say what that was going to be. And I have a really particular way that I want it to be. Even if I wanted it the other way yesterday, today you did not open the banana correctly. Now it is, she has a fair bit of resistance to many things, and is neurodivergent, and that has opened up even more opportunities to figure out how can you feel like you're moving through the world in a way that you really have control over. And that's time. Is we need to leave. Would you like to leave in 4 or 5 minutes? 5 minutes is what I was going to offer in the first place, where I was going to say, but if I say 4 or 5, you get to choose 5 and feel really good about that. It's, do you want to set the timer on your watch? And you're setting the time, so you get a say in what it's going to look like. I'll give you the general times, but you get to do it personally. And then, of course, with physical shows of affection and such, it's been since she was really little. Is if a child is reaching out for you, that is a clear sign that they would like to be held for you right now. If I go to pick you up and you don't want it, and it's not a safety thing, you're not reaching up, all right, I don't need to pick you up right now. Now then it became the, do you want hugs? Do you want a hug, a kiss, or a wave? Do you want to do knuckles instead of a high five? What would you like today? And for me, the hardest part about all of that has been translating that into family. I have a giant northern New Mexico family, and saying hello and saying goodbye at a family gathering takes approximately 3 hours because there's 50-something people. And the way I grew up was you went around and you gave everyone a hug and some people a kiss. And shifting that for my child was really tricky, in that for my family, any rejection of a family norm feels like a rejection of the family. And so much of that resistance to not just giving a child a hug or not giving them a kiss, I think, is about that fear of rejection, that you are rejecting me, you are rejecting our family, you don't believe that this is important, or that my love and the way I want to show it is important. And so what we did was talk to my family and say, hey, child sexual abuse is a real problem in the world, in this country, in this state, in this city. And you know that I know that because that's the work that I do. And you teaching my child that she gets to say yes or no to a hug for someone that she loves is teaching her that she gets to say yes or no to someone that she doesn't love. And it's helping her believe that she ultimately gets a say and that she's going to be loved and cared for, even if she doesn't want somebody touching her body that day. So can you please be a part of this? And that invitation to be a part of helping my child move through the world in a good way really helped bridge that gap and really lessen the you are rejecting me and our family. And many family members need lots of reminders every so often, but those reminders we give not in a shaming way. It is a, hey, remember, she doesn't have to say yes. Or a me rephrasing it. Do you want to give grandma a hug or no? I think that's it. There's a lot. I'm sure I'm going to have a different answer 10 years from now once I have a tween.
I appreciate that, Jess. Yeah, and it's really, really helpful to be a learner in this space. And Ian and Carly, thank you for the intro and the invite, and to the organization as a whole for holding space for this conversation. What wasn't in my bio, which I need to put in there, is I have a 3-month-old named Colibri, and a almost 2-year-old, 2 months away from 2, named Wiakba. And I think affirmative consent in our home is nonverbal. Both of the kids are hearing 3 languages consistently. I try to exclusively speak my language to both of them. My partner tries to exclusively speak her language. And then the bridge between both of us tends to be English. And so our almost 2-year-old is saying some words, but not to the point of like fully articulating themselves and being able to exactly tell me what's going on. So I find that a lot of my cues are reading body language, facial expressions, and energy. On that point, one of the key things my mom taught me, I asked her the other day, how did you raise 3 of us by yourself, all of whom were 2 years apart? But at some point there was a 5, 3, and months old. Like, how did you do it? And her teaching to me was like, your kids are gonna reflect the energy that you put out to them. And if you are stressed and tense, they're gonna give you stress and tense. And it's a reflection. And so it has caused me to be really curious around like the energy or what I feel when I'm around them. And ask myself, like, is this in the space because of me, them, or a combination of both? And I think I'm learning some of the pieces around like feeling the banana wrong. Just yesterday, Wiakba was having a meltdown, and the things he needed were almost changing second by second, and I was struggling to keep up. At one point I gave him his grapes, his snack, and then he wanted to hold it, and then he wanted to go into his room, and then we went into his room without the grapes, and then we had to go back and get the grapes and bring it in, and all of this was done through like noises and gestures. And it took me about 15 minutes to figure out he wanted me to put the grapes in a bowl. He wanted me to pick him up, carry him to the room, set him down, set his grapes down on the table, and then back away. And all of it was, yeah, like I said, it was gestures and noises. Similarly with Colibri, I think the difference is I feel like she's very clear with me about what she wants. and I'm learning as it kind of ebbs and flows. She prefers not to drink her whole bottle in one sitting, I realize, because she's pushing the bottle out, and that she's taught me that, like, to not try to hold the bottle there, think that it's falling, but that actually there's a time where she wants to kind of pause and probably digest some of her milk. And so I think, like, these experiences in terms of affirmative consent are really pushing me to interact with my kids on a more, like, emotional, energetic, spiritual, if you will, level of how I'm developing a relationship with them. I've definitely, I think, Jess, your pointers about even 4 or 5 minutes are, like, super helpful. And I'm gonna have to use that once we start getting to that point. I think the last thing I'll say is I think affirmative consent from a cultural standpoint has been difficult in terms of, like, what my partner Ellie and I are healing from in terms of, you know, our own generational things, the cultures that we were brought up in, the protocols or expectations that we have. And I find myself navigating the spaces in which, like, we're told, well, that's how it is, and that's what you have to do. And thinking about, well, where is agency and choice within that space? And really wandering into the place of, like, well, what's the purpose? What's the why? And so if we understand why, like, and a why is a destination, there may be different ways to get there, and how do we be respectful in the ways that we get to that why and understanding. It also takes into consideration cultural protocols, and knowing those have been different for Ellie and I think has been some space for us of, like, really kind of leaning into that. And I can share more later about kind of, like, the intricacies of what that's looked like for us. Because we come from different families. My family is quiet. There are car rides where we don't talk to each other. That's not because we're mad at each other or frustrated at each other. It's just how it is. We do a lot of thinking. Ellie's family is loud, and they cut each other off, and that's not disrespectful. And raising kids in those two spaces, with the bringing back into the conversation, like, affirmative consent, has been a bit of a challenge. I'll pause there.
Thank you both for sharing what you have, for sharing parts of your story, for sharing how it shows up in your family beyond you, right? And your culture, and how you navigate those spaces. As we were beginning today, I was trying to think about, so anti-violent parenting, maybe we're doing something against a system, but what are we backfilling that with, right? So what are we moving towards? And what I think I'm hearing in both of your responses is you're pro-love parenting. And I think about how fortunate both of your, or all of your children are to have fathers, like each of you. So want to acknowledge that, your thoughtfulness, your care, and your learning, right? Oops, didn't do that right. So how do I shift and adjust? Due to your point of changing almost second to second, right? And respond to what your child is communicating with you. The fact that you're aware of that, I think, is so beautiful for your children. Maybe as we continue to hold some tensions, I wonder about how you lean into being a loving parent, being anti-violent, seeking affirmative consent, and holding boundaries, right? And holding accountability. So I see a big smile on your face, Jess. Doesn't have to be turn taking, right? Jess, you go, then Duta, you go. We can all kind of jump in and share. But I know for me, holding my kids accountable is hard because I think part of that is holding myself accountable. Do I follow through on the things I say I'm going to do? And when I don't, then what do they learn from that? So I really resonated with what you said, Duta, with like the energy you give to your kids, they'll give it back to you. And so if I can be empathetic, if I can be accountable, great. But if I can't, how might we hold them accountable? So Jess, curious what your smile was about when you think about boundaries and accountability too.
Well, the first thing I think about is what is that? I think the initial context for that question is what does that mean for my child and holding boundaries and holding my child accountable? And what I do is flip it and think about how am I respecting my child's boundaries and how am I holding myself accountable? And the biggest place that comes up is when I set a boundary and I'm not totally sure why I set it. I set it and my child will say that it's unreasonable and react very strongly. And my initial reaction is to go, no, but I set the boundary. I need to stick with the boundary. And then I'm learning more and more to take a second and go, but why did I set that boundary in the first place? Is this something I actually care about? Or is this because we're in a public space and I feel maybe judged by other people? Or is it because I have been taught through many years that this thing isn't okay, but actually it really is, and it's something I'm 100% fine with? Or I was just feeling overwhelmed and stressed, and I decided that this was a moment where I needed to exert some kind of control. And so I set an arbitrary boundary. And learning to reflect in those moments when my child responds really strongly to a boundary, to go, wait, is this something that I actually care about, that actually matters, or is it not? And then taking the moment to say, if it's not, you know what? You're right. This was not something that I needed to tell you to do. Yeah, you are correct. That was unreasonable of me. I made a mistake. Yes, you can keep doing that thing. Or, you know what? You can keep doing that thing for a little bit, but here's where the boundary is going to be. And that's been a big shift and one that I struggle with a lot. When it comes to boundaries in my child and holding her accountable for things, that is a lot of, again, narration. It's Carly, when you were talking about getting buckled in the car seat. I've had a couple of big carries where it's a full meltdown in a space that for my child is usually paired with significant overstimulation. The biggest ones ever have happened at the bowling alley with the arcade. Never again, or maybe not for a very long time. And where it's I have to pick you up and carry you out of this space. And the whole time I'm doing that, I'm talking to her about what I'm doing. I know she can't hear me in those moments, but narrating that piece out loud helps regulate me. And saying, I'm here, I'm carrying you to the car right now because I need to keep your body safe. I'm putting you in the car seat right now because I need to keep your body safe. I'm buckling you in the car seat right now because I need to keep your body safe. Even while she's flailing and kicking and screaming, and also saying, you're really upset right now. It is not okay to kick me. You're really upset. It's not okay to hurt my body. I'm going to take a step back. Do you need to kick the seat? You can kick the seat as much as you need to. Do what you need to do right there. My body is not something that's okay to hit. And that, those moments are so hard and frustrating and overwhelming. And that narration just keeps me centered in what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And I don't know if she can really hear it, but that's not entirely the point, because when she's in that full meltdown mode, when children are in that full meltdown modes, they can't reason or logic. None of that is going to work. But she can hear my tone, if anything, and she can hear that I am calm and that I am loving and I am caring. And that's what the primary goal is in this moment. The other piece is that finding ways to to hold a boundary and interrupt this cycle in order to hold the boundary, especially when it is in the midst of a meltdown, is sometimes stopping whatever the boundary is and pausing. And for me, it's humor gets my child out of the meltdown loop really, really well. And so we pause and we come up with something silly for her to do, or I'll just start laughing about something and she kind of breaks that cycle. And then we can reintroduce the boundary when it is not such a big thing. And again, it's always stated in, it's my job as your parent to keep you safe and healthy. And this is what needs to happen in this moment. It's also sometimes we need to leave right now. So, your choices right now are, you can put on your shoes and you can walk out with me, or I'm going to need to move your body and carry you out. So you can pick which one. Either one is fine with me, but you get to make that choice. And then holding that and not letting the renegotiation start.
Yeah, again, super helpful. I was a teacher for many years and a school principal for another handful of years, and saw a lot of different stuff from fights to police coming in to frustrated parents. And I feel like I was able to kind of keep a pretty even keel throughout the whole thing. But there's something about the stress and anxiety of hearing my own kid cry that is like pushes edges for me that I didn't know were there. And I think when I first became a parent, that was jarring for me. I always thought of myself as a calm and collected guy that keeps it moving, or like is able to breathe and think about, okay, let's find our grounding and figure out how we move forward. With my own kids, I find myself reaching frustration points a lot sooner, and finding myself in a space where I need to figure out what's my mode of calm, what's my mode of like grounding myself in the moment when I can't figure out if they're hungry, if they need to be changed, if they want to move spaces, or a combination of all of the above. Or sometimes they just are crying. They figured out that they can cry. I think I'm still figuring that out, and I'm still kind of like understanding my role as a father, and how to kind of address my own anxiety and stress in a non-violent, in a non-intrusive way for my kids. And I think a lot of what I'm still, like I said, I'm still figuring that out, but what helps me is to remember that it's not personal, right? Like, Uyakba isn't crying because he wants to get back at me, or Colibri isn't pushing the bottle out because like she didn't like how I made her bottle. Like, that's the things that go through my mind in terms of like how anxiety or stress hits me may not be true in reality, right? Like, I need to remember that it's not personal. There's something visceral happening with my kids that and it's up to me to try to figure out. So I try to find, so that's helpful. The other one is trying to communicate really clearly with my partner about if I'm starting to experience some stress, Just, just letting her know, hey, I need some help. Can you take Wiakba? I think he's hungry. I think he wants to go outside. And just give me 2 minutes. Sometimes that's not available, and I need to figure out my own sort of way to push past that. I find that my own spiritual beliefs and practices are major for that. So going to sweat, singing, ceremonies are all really like grounding agents. The last thing I think about, and Jess, you made me think of this, is like I found that there's something about music, all music, for both of the kids that is helpful. Wiakba has 2 drums, and we sing on those every night. And I know that if we sing, whatever, like, it'll bring him back to the moment, to the present, if he's having some struggles, or if he hears his drum, and he was frustrated about the way I brought his snacks to him, it could bring him out of that and reground him. It's also the way that Colibri falls asleep many times, or my uncle's singing or flute music. And then the second one for both of them has been land. Just being outside. We're fortunate to have a courtyard that many times I've taken Wiakba as he's crying outside, and it's almost like going through a portal when we go through the door of like the inside struggle to the outside thriving and being like, oh, okay, I remember the universe, I remember where I'm at, and he's happy out there. And so trying to get both of them on the land, even if it's our backyard, as much as I can, to put their hands and feet on the ground, to let them play in the dirt, to let them run in the rocks, and because it's where they're culturally, where we put their umbilical cord, which is like the connection. And so I find that the land is a major relative or parent in the moment when something's going on for the kids. And so I need to remind myself that, even sometimes I feel like I'm too busy, or there's too much going on, and we can't go to the park, or anyway, so it pushes me to think like, how do I connect them to the land?
I really appreciate so much of what you both said. Due time thinking, like when you were speaking, you mentioned that like the land is also what like grounds you. And so I'm just reflecting on like often what we need is what they need, or they can co-regulate. Like if we meet our needs, like they can find their co-regulation through that. We had a question in the chat, and I just wanted to address it a little bit, because I feel like it ties into some of what was said. This is from Matthew. As we talk about being angry, it seems like as a parent, we need to stay calm enough when the child is angry, but it also seems healthy that our children see us get angry too. Just reflecting. So I have this, this tension, or this rub, or this challenge around parenting too, where I'm like, but isn't there like this perfectionist element of like always needing to be calm? That's like, one, it's not realistic. Two, that means that I'm like shoving my emotions down, and I'm like not being human in front of my parents. And it's just a question I'm always holding, like, does it really serve them to be like homeostasis constantly, or like the being of equilibrium? Like, I don't think so. So I just want to name, like, I think that we're, just from what I'm hearing, like, we're all coming to this conversation as like real whole humans who also have our histories of like various trauma, I'm sure, depending on our lived experience. And what you said, Duta, around like when it's our children, like when it triggers us even more. Like, it's more triggering than in like maybe a professional setting, or like a dynamic within some kind of like different container that's not like 100% of the time, always and forever, and for infinity and beyond now, which is like what we sign up for as parents. And then there's also, there's just like a different kind of connection, like our brains shift when we become parents, right? Like they shift for attunement to our children, for both women and men, and pregnant people, the birthing people, and the non-birthing partners, they shift. So that's a lot. So I think I just want to acknowledge, that like we are whole people. I appreciate the piece about anger, because I know for myself, when I am triggered, I'm going to go to defaults, and the defaults are usually what like culture or our society or our own families have embedded in us as practicing. And so it's like, how can I model or find ways to express my anger in ways that say that anger it's a valid emotion, it's an appropriate emotion, it's a guiding emotion, right? It's a directive emotion. There's a lot of things we should be angry about in our society right now that can drive us to action. It's a sign that my boundaries have been violated. So it's something I'm going to honor. How can I honor it in a safe and meaningful way? Like, I often tell my child, like, I'm really angry, so my body needs some space. Like, I'm feeling really, mommy's body really needs some space. I think sometimes when we hear about this kind of parenting, like nonviolent parenting, non-authoritarian parenting, respectful parenting, conscious parenting, positive parenting, like there's 50,000 names and approaches. One of the first pieces of feedback that I've heard, particularly from, let's say, like the older generation in my own life, is like, that's permissive, right? Or other variations of telling me like, you're going to be permissive. So my question to all of you, including Ian, like, I'd love to hear your perspective, Ian, is how do you navigate this question of like permissibility versus like nonviolent, supportive, respectful parenting in a way that like meets your needs, but also doesn't leave too many decisions to our children, because that can overwhelm them. Like, they're not equipped actually to make too many decisions. So if you have any feedback for any of that, I'm curious. And sorry, that was a bit of a mouthful.
I'll be quick and then invite others to join. Also want to remind folks, if you want to share additional questions, please do so. We'd love to respond. It's funny, Carly, when you said permissive, I felt that in my body, like, what's wrong with our kids having permission to do what they want? So even in kind of the naming of the word, like, why is it a bad thing for children to have choice, like Jess has been talking about? Why is it bad for children to have permission to move in this world in the way that they want to? And so I think it speaks a little bit to the power, right? Well, who's giving the permission? So my brain and my heart went into a lot of different directions just from that word. Maybe one more thing I just want to appreciate and lift up. Jess, you mentioned when you're in the moment, because the prompt around shouldn't we show our anger really resonated with me. That's something I'm working on. Jess, I love that you named tone, right? And even how you use your voice. You said, I'm calm, I'm loving, I'm caring. And I don't know if you did that intentionally. I don't know if that's a mantra you use with your child, but as you said that, I wrote that down because I'm like, I want to try that with the tone, and I want to try those words next time my daughter is making sounds, Duta, that pushes my boundaries, that activates a part of me that I want the world to stop so she can be happier, right? I want the world to stop so she can be calm, so she can be regulated, because I hear her hurting and I don't like that. So really appreciate that specific tip, Jess. But invite both of you, Duta and Jess, to respond to this idea of permissive parenting versus something else.
I think we had a de facto. You go in first, Jess. I'll jump in. Yeah, no, I think what comes to my mind is is trying not to be a fixer, and that's super hard for me. Like I'm a fixer. I want to figure out the path forward immediately, and sometimes that's not what I need to do. And I've even tried to get curious about the language I'm using. I've been thinking about language a ton with our kids, and one of the, like if Wiakba or Colibri start to make sounds that are telling me that there's something going on with them, either crying or other kind of noises, I've realized, like, in my language I would say it's okay, or something to the effect of like there's nothing wrong, or it's all good, right? Like it's it's what I heard. And so I'm trying to get, like, if I start to dissect, like, what is the message, is to kind of is to, even in my language, I'm asking them to disregard what's going on and to focus on the good, and to focus on the things that are, without really kind of like sitting in, like, they're experiencing some emotion or some feeling, in which they're vocalizing it. And so I've even tried to switch up how I respond to them in the moment in my language, to say something more like, I see you, I hear you, I know something's happening, and then I also try to tell them I love you, I see you, I hear you. So, like, as they're learning my language, I'm trying to really understand, like, what is it that what are the emotions or actions I'm teaching them as well. And then I think the last thing that comes to my mind in terms of, like, permissibility, is along the lines of, like, the modeling, or like seeing me struggle, but I'm also trying to show them the full arc of that emotion, right? Like, if they see me struggle, I want them to see me where I've gathered myself, and even at times, like, witness me going through it. My partner and I have talked to each other about, like, when we have disagreements, and if they're in front of our kids, we also want them to see, our kids to see the reconciliation, or to see the so that, like, the struggle is permissible, the anger, the frustration, the sadness, and that they can see that there's there's maybe not the end, but there's another part of it, in which there may not be as much struggle, frustration, anger, sadness, and that feels different. And so I've tried to really think of like, how do they experience all of that as a almost 2-year-old and 3-month-old, and seen that because and it's new for me. Like I didn't see that when I was growing up, so I'm having to kind of like in real time figure this out. And anyway, as we think about permissibility, like all of that kind of floods in for me.
Ian, I love that you immediately went to, but what's wrong with that? Because that's kind of where I go as well, is what are we afraid of that we're so hesitant to allow children to be full humans in the world and have a say in what their world looks like and have really reasonable responses given their developmental stage to things that we may see as very unreasonable. And like you were saying, Dutta, the like, no, it's okay, there's nothing wrong here, after the banana was peeled wrong or the grapes were given wrong, any of those things that for us seem absolutely like really disproportionate responses to the thing in front of them. But for them, it's never about the thing. It's not about the banana. And turns out for all of us, it's maybe never really about the thing. We're eternal toddlers with hopefully better coping skills. And so that why are we afraid of them having a really big response to something that doesn't seem like that big of a deal to us? Or why are we afraid of them pushing boundaries? Because that's what they're doing. That's how they're learning. That's part of being a child in the world. And having something to push against is really important. Of course, those boundaries need to be there at the other side, or else they're absolutely lost. And good boundaries are not always firm. Good boundaries are often really flexible and malleable based on the moment at hand. If I say you can never do this, but there's a moment where it absolutely makes sense to do that, and I still say, no, you cannot do this thing, it's confusing to my child. It's confusing to me because I don't really believe in this thing in this moment anyway. But I feel like I have to set this really firm boundary. When in fact, it could be like, you know what? This time, because this situation is different, you can do this thing. And another time, you might not be able to. And that is actually helping our children learn more flexibility in their responses to boundaries and understand that their boundaries don't need to be loosey-goosey or totally firm either. So that's my piece. As far as the anger goes, I am angry in front of my child. That happens. I am not a perfect parent, nothing even close to that. And that what that anger looks like is really important, because I was brought up that children were very much responsible for the emotions of the adults around them. And learned to take care of my parents and other family members' emotions, because that's what was modeled for them. And that's how we pass down those things. And I'm really not wanting to pass that down to my child. She is not responsible for my emotions. She's responsible for her actions. And sometimes those actions might hurt me, but my responses are not hers, to take care of in any way, shape, or form. And that's the piece for me with the anger. The other piece is that I think as men's default emotion that is allowed to be shown in so many cases is anger. And so really pushing against that, and that there are going to be plenty of opportunities for a young person to see a man being angry. Can I be one of the opportunities where she gets to see me being angry, maybe in a way that is still calm or is still loving? That's sometimes me saying, I'm really angry right now and I'm going to take a step away, and I'll come back to talk to you in a moment. And that's okay. And then, as folks were saying in the chat, such as I screw up all the time. And when I do that, repair is just so important, and making that repair intentional and loving and responsive to the moment at hand. I say that if I could sum up parenting in one sentence, It's that parenting is a constant grieving of the expectations we have for ourselves and our children. And grieving is not bad necessarily. Grief is beautiful. There's a lot of growth in grief, but it is a constant daily grieving. I want you to put your shoes on. You're not doing it. I expected myself to show up better in this moment, and I didn't. I'm really invested in you loving Hans Christian Andersen, the musical. You want nothing to do with that. Your neurotype is really different than I expected it to be, and that's a shift for me. I think about that a lot with queer and trans kids. Is so much of the narrative is parents grieving the loss of their insert child here, but they're not. They're grieving the expectations that they had for that child. And when we get into permissibility, that ends up weaving in for me. That is about us grieving expectations. And sometimes that's not even our own expectations. It's the expectations of others that we've taken on because we've been taught that's the way it should be, which in many cases is not the way it should be. Or maybe it is for some children, but not for the child in front of you.
I appreciate, oh, sorry.
Please.
You're gonna go. I just appreciate that so much. And you also reiterated a point that Marshall Martinez made in our last conversation around like parenting the child right in front of you, not the idea of the child you thought you'd have. And I wanted to the point about permissibility. I mean, this is good. It challenged me a little bit, actually, your embodied response, Ian. But like for me, when I think about it, and also what I've heard people talk about who really teach conscious, respectful, positive, you name it, approaches to parenting, have said like when you cross into permissibility, it's because you're not getting your needs met. Like that is what people are talking about, right? It's like, it's what parents are talking about when they're concerned about this permissibility, is that their needs aren't getting met in the relationship, because parenting is a dynamic relationship. And there are times when the family needs will supersede the child's, just like any relationship. And there are sometimes times when the child's need will supersede the family. And it's a really fine walk. But that's also where these boundaries come in. And I love this articulation around boundaries being better when they're flexible than when they're firm. Like they're not this like rigid ideation of how things should be, but they're actually responsive to our lives. That's really beautiful. But I know that I've been reflecting on, okay, like what am I hungry? Am I tired? Like, how can I meet these needs so that I can actually meet the needs of my child without getting triggered? Because their needs feel so big all the time, or my children's. Yeah, Jess.
Yeah, I just want to uplift that yes, you might really need me to find your scissors right now, and that is really important to you. And I'm having a blood sugar meltdown, and so that's just going to have to wait for a second. And also just that the flexible boundaries are also really clear. It doesn't mean that they're wishy-washy. They're still really clear. They're just, as you said, responsive to the moment at hand versus being a rigid idea of what we think should be.
Yeah, love that. Ian?
Yeah, I just want to give folks a heads up. We have about 20 minutes left together. We want to make space, Jess and Duta, for you to share kind of parting wisdom. But before that, I wonder if we can maybe go into one more question. Carly, if it's a terrible idea, I'm going off script, everybody. If it's a terrible idea, please redirect me. But one of the things, Duta, I heard you talk about reconciliation. And Jess, I heard you talk about repair. And when I think about anti-violent parenting, I also think about healing parenting. And so I get curious how your parenting is helping you heal from the parenting you received. When we talk about breaking cycles, when we talk about doing things different. And so again, maybe as an anti-violent parent, you're also being a healing parent, not only for your child, but for yourself. So what has that healing looked like for you, or repair or reconciliation, the term you'd prefer to use? Carly, would love to hear from you as well, how you're healing through your parenting.
Yeah, when Ellie was pregnant, we had a really good doula who was who took us through these series of questions that really tried to flush out how we were parented and what are our intentions for how we want to parent. It was really hard and pretty emotional because we talked about the things we didn't have, the things that we might be still carrying, and then naming that and trying to figure out like how do we address these over the next few months so that when the baby's here we can be as much as the parent that we envision ourselves to be. And I think, you know, like for me, I was not raised with my dad. It was my mom and my grandma that raised me. And later on in my life, I had a connection with my dad, but I felt like it was, you know, I had carried the sentiment of like, I don't need you to be my parent anymore. I want to know you because you know, we carry similar DNA, and I want to have a connection with my family on your side, but I didn't, you know, I don't know how my dad was a parent, and so I think there is a lack, at least for me, there was a lack of a father figure, and I became ever present when we knew Wiakpa was coming of like, what's that look like for me to be a father? What is my style? Have I had examples in terms of like what good fathering looks like? Um, my answer was no, I haven't seen it, and you know, I had to like think in real time in terms of like friends or acquaintances that I looked up to in terms of how they showed up as fathers. So I think, you know, like a lot of it is like still figuring it out. And figuring out that like being a parent to Wiakpa is different than being a parent to Colibri right now. And what they need is a little bit different. And what I, you know, like, and so I think like there's a lot of learning for me. There's a lot of really kind of, you know, self-actualization around what I don't know. And there's a lot of like falling on my face in terms of what I try to do. And I think like the healing for me is around like what does it look like to be a father? What has that meant in my own bloodline around like male figures? And knowing that I want something different moving forward. There may be a time where Wiakpa is a father and he's gonna look at his own experience and he's gonna have this similar question in front of him, and what will be those things that that you know, either things that you know are impactful for him, either the positive or negative. And like, yeah, I think the last thing that I'll share is like, I think there's also a lot of healing and through culture. And so just high level, a lot of what I've been setting as intentions in our ceremonies has been around family. This weekend on Saturday, we have a welcoming ceremony for our little one, and there's going to be a time where to our close friends and family, I state intentions of what I would like to see for Colibri. And I think it's not so much around like the profession or the amount of money I want to see her have. It's more about like the kind of person that Colibri becomes, and that has a lot to do with like values more so than jobs or colleges or items, you know. So I need to remember that, and also, you know, appreciate my mom and my grandma for the role that they played in making me who I am, and all the things that, you know, they struggled with in a similar way that I'm talking about. And they probably had a whole other set of things that they wanted to redefine for themselves that they had in their upbringing. So anyway, I'm just trying to like be ever present in that, around like, where am I giving myself time and space to set intentions, to have silence, to be in song, dance, and to have some physical exertion and some emotional outlets, and the way I ensure that my kids experience those things too.
Go for it, Carly.
I actually want to, I'll keep mine short because I want Ian to have a voice in it if possible. And just reflect, I think Ian's question was building on Arios's comment in the chat here. Healing. Yeah, I think that's it's a really big question. And the thing that I feel like I can speak to is one of the ways that I am making sure that I'm in an ongoing healing journey as a parent, but also as like a colleague and a partner, is like I go to counseling and and engaging resources, and there's something healing in that, and that comes with privilege. That comes with privileges that I have. But like seeking support around spiritual healing is something that I do for myself. Seeking, you know, having a counseling relationship, and my partner, who is a cis man, also has a counselor and a counseling relationship. And we've worked with a parenting counselor because I was not doing well. I was completely underwater as a parent with 2 under 2. It's brutal. It's absolutely brutal. And you still have all of your other relationships to carry and all of your other responsibilities to carry. And parenting is just, it's your capacity ideally to meet the need of parenting is just always needs to be in a growth space. And that's really challenging. So yeah, just seeking resources, which I don't know that my parents obviously did the best they could, but they didn't seek resources or seek support or seek help where it might have been accessible, or maybe they didn't see where it was accessible, right? Or maybe it wasn't accessible to them. And so I try to bring in those resources where I can. Ian, I want to hear what you have to say too.
I'd love Jess to go first, if you're open to it, Jess.
Sure. Carly, the last piece you said about your parents really reminded me that part of healing and parenting for me has been seeing one of my parents show up for my child in all the ways they couldn't show up for me, because they now have the resources that they did not have then. They have the support that they did not have then. And that I imagine for some folks could end up feeling like, oh, well, why couldn't you do that for me? But for me, seeing that is just unbelievably healing, because it says, oh no, this is something you wanted to do that you were not able to. And that's been really lovely. It's been huge. Yay. Love it. The other part for me, and maybe I'm going to take this in a different direction, Ian, and hopefully that's okay. But we haven't talked a lot. We've talked a lot about the individual here, parenting. I'm doing these individual things to help. When so much of parenting that is preventing future violence for our children is so much bigger than that. It's so the individual level is so important, but also we have all of these protective factors that are family protective factors and then community level protective factors that we do this weird delineation between response, healing, and prevention, when in fact, I think so many of those things need to be a little more integrated. And things like raising a child with flexible gender norms, that is child sexual abuse prevention. Children who are raised in families and communities that don't revere authority are less likely to be targeted. Families, communities where it's okay to question things are communities, families, and children that are less likely to be targeted. When we have curated choices, all of those pieces, that's what we want our communities to look like anyway. That when we can do that on the community level, we're also doing it for our child. And so for me, that's on prevention side, but it's also healing, because as we can shift those things, we're also healing lots of wounds that have already happened. On the more personal level, it's right there with you, Carly. So much therapy. Therapy's great. And I can get really caught in those moments where I screw up, like so caught in moments where I make a mistake as a parent and feel like I have failed my child. And my therapist is so good at saying, and what happened afterwards? This moment happened. What happened afterwards? And we really focus on what that repair looks like is, oh, yes, I screwed up. And then I went back and we talked about what happened and I apologized or I comforted or whatever that was. Because if we're stuck in that moment, for me, if I'm stuck in that moment of I've screwed up, I go into a big shame spiral, and there's no growth in the shame spiral. There's no movement from the shame. We can't actually change our behavior or deepen a relationship when we're in that place of shame. So that's been a really helpful shift for me.
Thank you, Jess, Carly, and Duta. I'll give a quick answer, and then Duta and Jess, curious if you might begin to take us home with maybe one or two sentences, parting wisdom you want to share with folks on the call. Jess, really appreciate you going to a more macro level. I do think we've been sharing a lot of personal stories, and I know you have a lot of experience and observations about what that means in terms of ripple effect and at a community level and those sorts of things. So wanted to offer that up to you both to be thinking about it. I'll share for my personal practice as a parent. I've tried to create more space where I listen to my children's hearts. And so I'll ask things like, what are you feeling? And what's happening in your heart right now? I think I grew up as someone who was more heart-led and emotional, and being in the body I'm in, I was given lots of feedback that that's not the thing to do. Be more cognitive, be more logical, be more reasonable. So as a parent, I'm healing myself as I invite my kids into that space where our hearts can talk with each other, and it doesn't have to be about reason and logic and cognition. It can be more emotional. We have about 5 more minutes. I want to thank everybody for being with us, participants, panelists. Curious, Carly, if you have anything else you'd want to share before we invite Duta and Jess to maybe give us some parting wisdom.
Sorry, I'll change my mind. Just that next week, we do have a conversation on relational repair and accountability in parenting, which is great because it actually is a perfect thread from that place of like what happened after. So we'll dive into that next week. We'll send that information in the follow-up, and I'll leave it to our guest speakers.
I'll take this opportunity to go again a little bigger and work a little upstream. As individuals and communities that care about preventing violence for ourselves, for our children, for our families, for everybody, there are so many things we can do that have such a clear impact on violence prevention. So we have so many things coming up. Paid family medical leave is violence prevention. Universal basic income is violence prevention. Protecting source of income in housing so that folks who have Section 8 vouchers cannot be discriminated against. That is violence prevention. Affordable housing, period, is violence prevention. Affirmative consent legislation, like was passed this past year, is violence prevention. Comprehensive sex ed is violence prevention. And that when we're doing all of these things, we're not only preventing sexual violence, domestic violence, so on and so forth, but we're also impacting all of these other areas of harm in our communities. We end up having such a bigger impact. So we do a lot on the individual level in our homes as parents, and that when we are people in a larger community, we can do everything right in our homes, but our families do not exist only within the context of our homes. And so working across what's called the social ecological model within our communities and within larger society is how we're actually going to shift that for our children and our families and our friends' children and all of the folks. So not wisdom, but action.
Yeah, I think what's on my mind is like, I feel like a lot of what we've been talking about today is like bringing me back to some of the basics that I believe of, like, and I think it's, you know, there are words like love and compassion and care and understanding and I think like so I'm holding those as kind of like a recognition that I can tend to overcomplicate things around how I'm showing up for my kids or my partner, or even like how I'm conceptualizing them learning my language or them learning my culture, traditions, or spirituality. It's bringing me back to like the place that trust that like what's going to happen is going to happen, and I need to come back to the space where I'm holding love and care and protection at times and compassion for my kids and myself, and to not overthink too much. Maybe the ancillary thought for me is like is to root in the why of some of like the cultural pieces. I think there's so much, you know, like the work that happens where I'm working, so much in like family and lineage and ancestry and community and land that is really basic human need, basic kind of like, anyway, so I'm holding that too around like the power and the genius that's in many of our communities, and careful not to over complicate or over protocol at times some of the things that my kids are learning within that.
Thank you so much to both of you, to Ian, to all of our participants. Thank you for bringing back in the macro community family, that we don't exist in isolation, that every parenting choice is also an intersectional choice. We hope everybody is well, everybody's cared for, everybody has their needs met, and we'll see you next Wednesday. Take care, everybody.